The blood trickled down Willa Blackburn's chin as she pressed her trembling fingers to her split lip, a punishment far more merciful than what waited for her if she ever touched a book again. It was 1873 in Park City, Utah Territory, a silver mining town nestled in the Wasatch Mountains where men came to seek their fortunes and women were expected to know their place, and that place wasn't with their noses buried in books, learning things that could put dangerous ideas in their heads. "Next time, girl, I won't be so gentle," her father, Silas Blackburn, snarled as he tucked his heavy leather belt back into his waistband. "No daughter of mine is going to waste time with reading when there's work to be done. You're 20 years old now, high time you found yourself a husband instead of filling your head with nonsense." Willa said nothing as she wiped the blood from her face with her sleeve. She'd been caught with a small primer she'd borrowed from the schoolteacher's assistant, hidden beneath her mattress like contraband. The fact that she'd taught herself to read bits and pieces over the years only infuriated her father more. A woman who could read was a threat to the natural order, he believed, especially one who worked in his boarding house where minors might take a shine to her. "The good Lord gave you a pretty face, not a scholar's mind," he continued, his voice thick with the whiskey he'd been drinking since noon. "Now get back to the kitchen. Those minors will be wanting their supper, and you haven't even started the bread." Willa nodded silently and headed downstairs to the kitchen of the Last Chance boarding house. Her mother had died 5 years ago of consumption, leaving Willa to take over the cooking, cleaning, and laundry for the dozen or so minors who rented rooms. It was endless, thankless work, but at least it kept a roof over her head and food in her belly. As she kneaded the bread dough with more force than necessary, Willa let her mind wander to the books she'd glimpsed in the mercantile's window. Stories of far-off places, adventures, and romance. The hunger she felt for those stories was almost physical, a yearning deeper than anything else she'd ever known. The few scattered words and phrases she could make out weren't enough. She wanted to truly read, to lose herself in pages filled with words that could transport her anywhere but here. The jingle of spurs on the wooden porch outside interrupted her thoughts. The door swung open, bringing with it a gust of cold mountain air and the imposing figure of a man Willa had never seen before. He removed his hat, revealing tousled dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was tanned and weathered from the sun, with a strong jawline shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught Willa's attention, a startling blue that seemed to take in everything at once, including her bruised lip and the flour dusting her apron. "Pardon the intrusion, madam," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "Name's Deacon Quinn. I'm looking for lodging. Heard this was the place to inquire." Before Willa could respond, her father emerged from the back room, a ledger in hand and a sudden smile plastered on his face. "Indeed it is, sir. Silas Blackburn, proprietor of the Last Chance. We've got one room left, just opened up yesterday when Johnson struck it rich and moved on to Salt Lake City." He glanced at Willa. "This here's my daughter. She tends to the cooking and cleaning." Deacon Quinn nodded politely in her direction. "Miss Blackburn, Mr. Quinn," she replied softly, lowering her gaze back to the bread dough. "What brings you to Park City?" Silas asked, pouring a whiskey without waiting to be asked. "Cattle," Deacon replied, accepting the drink with a nod of thanks. "Drove a herd up from Arizona Territory, sold them off yesterday to the mining company to feed their workers. Thought I might winter here before heading back south." Willa kept her eyes on her work, but her ears focused intently on the conversation. There was something different about this man, not just his appearance, which was certainly striking enough, but something in his manner. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that didn't need boasting or bluster. $5 a week gets you a room and 3 meals a day," her father was saying. "Laundry's extra, but my Willa does a fine job with it." "Sounds fair," Deacon said, pulling out a leather wallet and counting out the money. "I'll take it for the month to start." Silas's eyebrows shot up, pleased at the prospect of guaranteed income. "Well now, that's mighty fine. Willa, show Mr. Quinn to the room at the end of the hall upstairs, the one with the view of the mountains." Wiping her hands on her apron, Willa nodded and gestured for the cowboy to follow her. As they climbed the narrow staircase, she was acutely aware of his presence behind her. The boarding house had housed many men over the years, but none had made her feel quite so self-conscious. "Here you are, Mr. Quinn," she said, pushing open the door to a small but clean room furnished with a bed, a washstand, and a battered trunk for storing personal items. "Thank you, Miss Blackburn," he replied, stepping into the room and placing his saddlebags on the bed. He glanced at the window, which indeed offered a view of the snow-capped Wasatch Range. "Your father wasn't exaggerating about the view." "No, sir. It's the best room in the house." She hovered in the doorway, uncertain whether to leave or offer further information about meals and house rules. Deacon turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable as his eyes briefly flicked to her bruised lip. "If you don't mind my asking, Miss Blackburn, is there a bookshop in town?" The question caught her off guard. Most miners and cowboys who passed through were interested in the location of the nearest saloon or brothel, not books. "There's no proper bookshop," she answered cautiously, "but Mr. Hollister at the Mercantile carries some books and newspapers from Salt Lake City." Deacon nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate the information. I find reading helps pass the long evenings." Something flickered in Willa's chest, a spark of interest, maybe even kinship. A man who valued books was rare in these parts. "Supper's at 6, she said, backing into the hallway. "We ring a bell." "I'll listen for it," he replied with a slight smile that transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him appear younger, more approachable. As Willa returned to her bread-making, she couldn't help but wonder about the cowboy who asked about books instead of whiskey. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flutter of curiosity about someone else's story. In the days that followed, Deacon Quinn proved himself an unusual boarder in several respects. He was unfailingly polite, always thanking Willa for meals and keeping his room tidier than most men bothered with. He rose early and often returned late, though never drunk or rowdy like the miners. And most curious of all, he returned from town one afternoon with a stack of books from the Mercantile, nodding politely to Willa as he carried them upstairs. Willa found herself watching him when she thought no one would notice. There was something about the way he carried himself, a kind of quiet dignity that set him apart. He didn't boast or gamble or chase after the saloon girls like the other men. Instead, he spent his evenings reading by lamplight in his room or occasionally joining the other boarders for a game of cards, though he never seemed to lose himself in the competition the way others did. One evening, as Willa was collecting the dinner plates, Deacon caught her eye and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "That's quite a collection of bruises you've acquired, Miss Blackburn." Willa froze, her hand instinctively rising to touch the yellowish marks on her wrist where her father had grabbed her the day before, catching her attempting to decipher the headlines of a newspaper left on the kitchen table. "I'm clumsy," she replied, the practiced lie falling from her lips automatically. Deacon's blue eyes held hers for a long moment, and she knew he didn't believe her. But he simply nodded and returned to his coffee. Later that night, after the kitchen was clean and the house quiet, Willa slipped out onto the back porch to escape the stuffy heat of the kitchen. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the distant promise of snow. She leaned against the railing, gazing up at the vast canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clear mountain sky. The soft creak of the door behind her made her turn quickly, half expecting her father's looming presence. Instead, Deacon stepped onto the porch, a book in his hand and surprise on his face. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't realize anyone was out here." "It's all right," Willa replied, relieved it wasn't her father. "I was just getting some air." He nodded, seeming to understand more than her words conveyed. "It's a beautiful night." "It is," she agreed, turning back to the stars. After a moment's hesitation, she asked, "What are you reading?" Deacon glanced down at the book in his hand. "Moby Dick." "It's about a whaling ship and a captain's obsession with hunting a particular white whale." "It sounds exciting," Willa said wistfully. "It is, though the author tends to wax philosophical at times." He paused, studying her face in the dim light spilling from the kitchen window. "Do you enjoy reading, Miss Blackburn?" The question hung in the air between them, fraught with implications. Willa hesitated, torn between her desperate desire to talk about books with someone who understood and the ingrained fear of her father's reaction. "I would," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "if I knew how properly." Deacon's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. "You can read some, though," Willa nodded cautiously, "bits and pieces. I taught myself from labels and newspapers when no one was looking, but I can't. I don't know enough to read a real book." She glanced over her shoulder toward the house, as though her father might materialize from the shadows. "My father doesn't approve of women reading. He says it puts ideas in their heads." "Some men fear ideas more than they fear guns," Deacon observed quietly. They stood in companionable silence for several moments, the night air growing colder around them. "I could teach you," he said suddenly, "if you wanted to learn properly." Willa's heart leapt at the offer, even as fear clamped down on her excitement. "My father would never allow it." "Then he doesn't need to know," Deacon replied simply. "I imagine you know this house and its routines better than anyone. Surely there are moments when you could slip away unnoticed." The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "There's the time after lunch when Pa takes his nap," she said slowly, thinking it through. "And on Sundays when he goes to Durgin's saloon to play cards." Deacon nodded. "There, you see, we could meet then, just for short lessons at first." Willa's mind raced with the possibilities, even as her practical side warned her of the risks. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "You don't even know me." His expression grew serious. "Everyone deserves the chance to read, Miss Blackburn. Words are their freedom. They're windows into other worlds, other lives. No one should be denied that because of their sex or station." He paused. "Besides, I find myself with time on my hands, and teaching is something I've done before." "You were a teacher?" she asked, surprised. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "For a time, in a small school in Colorado before I took to driving cattle." His expression grew distant for a moment before he refocused on her. "So what do you say? Shall we defy your father's edicts together?" It was reckless, foolhardy even. If her father discovered their arrangement, the consequences would be severe. But the thought of finally learning to read properly, of understanding the stories that had tantalized her for so long, was irresistible. "Yes," she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of rebellion and hope. "I would like that very much, Mr. Quinn." "Deacon," he corrected gently, "if we're to be co-conspirators in this endeavor, I think we can dispense with formalities when we're alone." "Deacon," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her tongue, "and you should call me Willa." He nodded, his expression serious but his eyes warm. "Well then, Willa, shall we begin tomorrow after lunch when your father takes his nap?" "Yes," she agreed, a tremor of excitement running through her. "I'll find a way to come to your room without being seen." "Good." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed hers in it. His grip was warm and firm, the calluses on his palm testament to years of hard work. "Until tomorrow, then." As he released her hand and returned inside, Willa remained on the porch, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope. The following day crawled by at an agonizing pace. Willa dropped a plate at breakfast, earning a sharp rebuke from her father. She oversalted the stew for lunch, though thankfully no one commented. Her mind was entirely occupied with the secret meeting awaiting her, to the exclusion of almost everything else. Finally, after clearing the lunch dishes and ensuring her father was settled in his chair with his customary glass of whiskey, Willa watched from the kitchen as his head began to nod. Within minutes, he was snoring softly, his chin resting on his chest. Removing her apron and smoothing her hair, Willa crept quietly up the back stairs, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would wake the entire house. The upstairs hallway was deserted, the miners all having returned to their work after lunch. She hesitated outside Deacon's door, suddenly overcome with doubt. What if someone saw her entering a man's room? What if her father woke early and found her missing? What if this was all some elaborate trick, and Deacon Quinn wasn't the honorable man she believed him to be? Before she could talk herself out of it, she raised her hand and knocked very softly on the door. It opened immediately, as though he'd been waiting just on the other side. Deacon greeted her with a reassuring smile and stepped back to allow her entry. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind," he said quietly as he closed the door behind her. "I almost did," she admitted, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. suddenly very aware that she was alone with a man in his private quarters, something that would ruin her reputation if discovered. But a quick glance around the room dispelled some of her nervousness. Deacon had clearly prepared for their lesson. The small table by the window had been cleared of his personal items and now held a slate, a piece of chalk, and a thin book. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to the single chair. "I thought we'd start with the basics, the alphabet and simple words to see how much you already know." Willa took the offered seat, feeling a curious mixture of embarrassment and eagerness. "I know some letters," she said. "I can recognize them in words sometimes, but I often mix them up." Deacon nodded, standing beside her rather than looming over her. "That's a common difficulty. We'll work on that." He picked up the chalk and handed it to her. "Show me which letters you know and we'll go from there." For the next half hour, Willa demonstrated her limited knowledge of letters and sounds, with Deacon patiently correcting and guiding her. There was no condescension in his manner, no impatience when she struggled. He simply explained again in a different way or offered a memory trick to help her remember. "You know more than you give yourself credit for," he said as their time drew to a close. "With regular practice, you'll be reading full sentences in no time." Willa beamed at the praise, a warm glow of accomplishment spreading through her. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for doing this, for not thinking less of me because I don't know things most children learn." "It's not your fault you weren't taught," he replied seriously. "And your desire to learn despite the obstacles speaks to your character, not your lack of education." He reached for the thin book on the table. "This is for you to practice with. It's a primer meant for children, but the stories are simple and will help you recognize common words." Willa's eyes widened in alarm. "I can't take that. If my father found it, hide it well," Deacon advised. "Under a loose floorboard, perhaps, or in the lining of your dress. Practice when you can, and we'll review your progress when we meet again." Reluctantly, Willa accepted the book, already thinking of where she might conceal it. There was a hollow space behind a brick in the kitchen fireplace where she sometimes hid small treasures, a ribbon her mother had given her, a pretty stone from the creek, a pressed wildflower. "The book would fit there. Sunday," she said. "Pa will be at the saloon all afternoon. We could meet then." Deacon nodded. "Sunday it is." He moved to open the door for her but paused with his hand on the knob. "Be careful, Willa. I don't want this to cause you trouble." The genuine concern in his eyes touched something deep inside her. "I will," she promised. "Thank you again, Deacon." With the primer carefully concealed in the pocket of her skirt, Willa slipped out of the room and hurried back downstairs, her mind already filled with letters and sounds and the promise of words yet to come. The days that followed took on a new pattern. Outwardly, nothing changed. Willa cooked and cleaned and served the boarders with the same quiet efficiency as always. But inwardly, she was transformed. Every spare moment was devoted to practicing her letters, mouthing words silently as she worked, stealing glances at the primer hidden behind the brick when she was alone in the kitchen. Sunday couldn't come quickly enough. When it finally arrived, bringing with it her father's customary departure for an afternoon of cards and drinking, Willa could barely contain her excitement. She hurried through her chores, and as soon as the last of the miners had left the house to pursue their own Sunday diversions, she rushed upstairs to Deacon's room. This time, she didn't hesitate before knocking. The door opened immediately, and Deacon's pleased expression at seeing her sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "You've been practicing," he said approvingly as she demonstrated her improved knowledge of the alphabet and basic words. "Every chance I get," she confirmed, unable to hide her pride. "I can read the first story in the primer now. It's about a cat and a rat." "Show me," he encouraged, sitting beside her at the table. Willa carefully read the simple tale, stumbling over a few words but managing to reach the end without help. When she finished, she looked up to find Deacon watching her with something like admiration. "That was excellent," he said. "You're a natural, Willa. You have a mind for language." She blushed at the praise, unused to receiving compliments of any kind, much less ones about her intellect. "It's easy when someone explains it properly," she said, "and when I'm not afraid of being caught." A shadow passed over Deacon's face. "Has your father always been so?" "Opposed to your education," Willa nodded, her fingers tracing the simple illustrations in the primer. "For as long as I can remember, he wasn't always so harsh about it, though. That started after my mother died. She paused, old grief welling up unexpectedly. She used to slip me scraps of paper with words written on them, little things like apple or sun. She'd whisper the sounds when Pa wasn't around. I think she hoped I'd have more choices than she did. Deacon's expression softened. She sounds like a brave woman. She was, Willa agreed quietly. She wanted more for me than just being someone's wife and cook, but after she was gone, Pa got stricter, said it was his duty to make sure I turned out proper. There's nothing improper about reading, Deacon said, a hint of anger coloring his tone. Knowledge isn't something to be feared. It is if you want to keep people in their place, Willa replied with unexpected bitterness. Pa says a woman who reads gets notions above her station, says it leads to discontent. And are you discontent, Willa? Deacon asked gently. She met his gaze, something shifting between them in that moment of honesty. Yes, she admitted. I want more than this, more than cooking and cleaning until I'm old, more than marrying some miner who'll expect the same things of me that Pa does. She gestured to the book. I want to read stories about places I'll never see. I want to know things just for the joy of knowing them. Deacon nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's not discontent, that's being human. For the remainder of their time together that Sunday, Deacon introduced her to more complex words and taught her some basic rules of spelling. But the conversation had changed something between them. There was an ease now, a sense of shared purpose that went beyond teacher and student. As their lesson concluded, Deacon reached under his bed and pulled out a wooden box. I've been thinking about your situation, he said, opening the box to reveal several books of various sizes. It's not safe for you to keep books in your room, but you need materials to practice with. He selected a small volume with a blue cover. This is a collection of short stories. I thought perhaps we could read them together during our lessons and you could practice with the primer in between. Willa reached out to touch the book reverently. What are the stories about? All sorts of things. Adventures mostly, men and women facing challenges and finding their courage. He smiled slightly. Rather like you're doing now. She looked up at him, struck by the sincerity in his expression. I'm not very brave, she demurred. You're braver than you know, he countered. It takes courage to reach for something you've been told isn't for you. The warmth in his voice made her cheeks flush, and she looked away, suddenly shy. I should go, she said reluctantly. Pa will be back soon and I need to start supper. Deacon nodded, returning the box of books to its hiding place. Same time on Wednesday, after lunch? Yes, she agreed, already looking forward to it. I'll be here. Over the next few weeks, their lessons became the center around which Willa's life revolved. Twice or sometimes 3 times a week, they would meet in Deacon's room for an hour of reading and conversation. Her progress was remarkable, driven by her hunger for knowledge and Deacon's patient guidance. As December settled over Park City, bringing with it heavy snowfalls and bitter cold, the lessons took on a new dimension. They began to read together from Deacon's collection of books, first simple tales, then more complex stories. Sometimes he would read aloud while she followed along, his deep voice bringing the characters and settings to life in a way that made her heart ache with longing for a world beyond the boarding house. It wasn't just reading that Deacon taught her. Their conversations ranged widely, touching on history, geography, and philosophy. He told her about the places he'd been: the vast prairies of Texas, the rugged mountains of Colorado, the desert landscapes of Arizona Territory. He described cities she'd only heard mentioned: Denver, San Francisco, St. Louis, painting such vivid pictures with his words that she felt as though she'd walked their streets herself. In turn, she shared with him the small details of her life, her memories of her mother, her dreams of someday seeing the ocean, her observations of the people who passed through the boarding house. He listened as though her thoughts mattered, as though the musings of a boarding house cook were as worthy of attention as any scholarly discourse. It was during one such lesson in mid-December, as snow fell softly outside the window, that something shifted between them. They were reading from a collection of poetry not Willa's favorite, as she found the language often convoluted and difficult to follow, but Deacon insisted it was good practice. She walks in beauty like the night, he read, his voice taking on a different quality, softer somehow, more intimate. Of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes. He paused, looking up to find Willa watching him intently. "Do you understand what he's saying?" he asked. "He's describing a woman," she replied, "comparing her to the night sky." "Yes, but it's more than that. He's saying she contains both darkness and light, that she's complex, containing contradictions that make her beautiful." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "Like you, Willa." The air between them seemed to still, charged with something unnamed but palpable. Willa's heart fluttered in her chest as she realized the direction of his thoughts. "Me?" she asked uncertainly. I'm just ordinary." Deacon shook his head slowly. "There's nothing ordinary about you. You have more courage and determination than most men I've known. And despite everything, you've maintained a gentleness that's remarkable." He reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching the back of her hand. It wasn't the first time they'd touched. There had been accidental brushes of hands as they turned pages, the occasional guiding touch as he helped her form letters on the slate. But this was different, deliberate, meaningful. "Deacon," she whispered, unsure what else to say, her body tensing with the conflicting desires to pull away and to turn her hand over to clasp his. Before either could act on the moment, heavy footsteps on the stairs broke the spell. Willa jerked her hand back, rising from her chair in alarm. "Someone's coming up," she hissed, panic flooding her system. Deacon reacted quickly, closing the book and sweeping it and the slate under the bed with one fluid motion. "The closet," he directed, pointing to the small wardrobe in the corner. "Quickly." Willa darted into the cramped space just as a loud knock sounded on the door. Through the small gap between the closet doors, she watched as Deacon composed himself and went to answer. It was her father, his face flushed with either cold or drink, probably both. "Quinn," he said gruffly. "Got a message for you downstairs. Some fella asking after you at the telegraph office." "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn," Deacon replied calmly. "I'll head over there directly." Silas's eyes narrowed suspiciously as he glanced around the room. "Thought I heard voices up here." "Just reading aloud to myself," Deacon said easily. "Helps me remember the words better." Silas grunted, clearly dubious but unwilling to press the issue with a paying boarder. "Well, come on down when you're ready." That telegraph clerk said it sounded urgent. As soon as her father's heavy tread receded down the stairs, Willa emerged from the closet, her face pale with fear. "That was too close," she whispered. Deacon nodded grimly. "We need to be more careful if he'd found you here." The implications hung in the air between them. Discovery would mean disgrace for Willa, probably a beating from her father, and almost certainly Deacon's expulsion from the boarding house if he was lucky enough to avoid a shotgun wedding or worse. "I should go down the back stairs," she said, moving toward the door. "If he sees us both coming down together." "Wait," Deacon said, catching her wrist gently. "Willa, about what I said before, we don't have time now," she interrupted, though her pulse quickened at his touch. "You should see about that telegram. It might be important." He released her with obvious reluctance. "We'll talk later," he promised. "Be careful going down." Willa slipped out of the room and made her way silently down the back staircase, her mind whirling with equal parts fear of discovery and the memory of Deacon's words. His touch, the look in his eyes as he'd compared her to the woman in the poem. It wasn't until she was safely back in the kitchen, her hands busy with the familiar task of kneading dough for the evening's bread, that she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth that had been growing inside her for weeks. She was falling in love with Deacon Quinn. And if the look in his eyes was any indication, he felt the same way. The revelation should have filled her with joy, but instead it brought a wave of despair. What future could there possibly be for them? He was a wandering cowboy, a man of education and experience who had seen the world beyond these mountains. And she was a boarding house cook, who had never been more than 10 miles from Park City, a woman with no prospects and no freedom to choose her own path. Even if he did care for her, even if he did want something more than friendship, what could he offer? And what could she give in return, besides her heart and the burden of a woman who would need to be taught everything about the world beyond this small mining town? As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Park City in a pristine white that belied the grime and hardship beneath, Willa pushed her feelings deep inside, focusing instead on the rhythm of her hands in the dough and the practical realities of her life. Dreams and poetry were fine things, But they wouldn't keep the boarders fed or protect her from her father's wrath if he ever discovered her secret. Later that evening, as she served supper to the miners and her father, Willa noticed that Deacon's place was empty. When he hadn't appeared by the time she was clearing the dishes, she ventured a question to her father. "Is Mr. Quinn not joining us tonight?" Silas shrugged, more interested in his plate than her question. "Said he had business in town, didn't say when he'd be back." A flicker of worry passed through her. Had the telegram contained bad news? Was he avoiding her after the moment they'd shared? Or was he simply busy with whatever mysterious business had brought him to Park City in the first place? Her questions remained unanswered until well after midnight, when the sound of the front door opening and closing roused her from a light sleep. From her small room off the kitchen, she could hear Deacon's familiar tread on the stairs, slower and heavier than usual. Relief that he had returned safely warred with curiosity about his absence. But there would be no way to ask him until their next lesson, scheduled for Sunday afternoon. Until then, she would have to content herself with the knowledge that he was back under the same roof, only a flight of stairs and a world of social conventions away. Sunday dawned clear and bitterly cold, the temperature having dropped dramatically overnight. Willa rose early to stoke the fires and prepare breakfast for the few boarders who hadn't gone home to their families for Christmas, which was just a week away. The morning passed in a flurry of activity as she prepared a more elaborate Sunday dinner than usual, hoping to bring some cheer to those who remained at the boarding house during the holiday season. Her father, as was his custom, departed for Durgin's saloon immediately after the meal, leaving Willa free for her clandestine lesson with Deacon. But when she knocked softly on his door at their appointed time, there was no answer. Puzzled and a little concerned, she knocked again, slightly louder. Still nothing. Gathering her courage, she tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. The room was empty, the bed neatly made. Deacon nowhere to be seen. Disappointment washed over her, followed quickly by worry. It wasn't like him to miss their lesson without warning. Perhaps he had been called away by whatever business had taken him to town on Thursday. As she turned to leave, her eye caught a glimpse of something unusual. The closet door was slightly ajar, and inside, where there should have been only Deacon's spare clothing, she could see the corner of something large and wooden. Curiosity overcoming her sense of propriety, Willa opened the closet door fully to reveal a beautifully crafted bookshelf, small enough to fit in the alcove, but large enough to hold several dozen books. It was empty now, its polished pine shelves gleaming in the winter sunlight streaming through the window. It was meant to be a surprise, came Deacon's voice from the doorway behind her. Willa spun around, her hand flying to her throat in alarm. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I was worried when you didn't answer, and the door was unlocked." Deacon stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept much, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his expression as he gazed at the bookshelf. "It's not quite finished," he said, moving to stand beside her. "I need to secure it to the wall properly." The shopkeeper promised to deliver a shipment of books next week, just in time for Christmas. Willa stared at him, uncomprehending. "Books? For what?" His eyes met hers, warm with an emotion she dared not name. "For you, Willa, I'm filling a shelf with books just for you." Her breath caught in her throat as the meaning of his words sank in. "For me? But why? How?" Deacon ran his hand along the smooth wood of the shelf, his expression contemplative. "I've been helping the blacksmith with some metalwork in exchange for the use of his tools to build this. And I've ordered books from Salt Lake City, ones I thought you might enjoy. Stories of adventure and romance, poetry, even some history." He paused, suddenly looking uncertain. I hoped it might please you." Tears welled in Willa's eyes, overwhelming emotion making speech difficult. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me," she finally managed to say. "But Deacon, where will I keep them if my father found out?" "I've been thinking about that," he replied, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "The telegram I received on Thursday was from an old friend in Denver. He's offered me a position managing a cattle operation just outside the city. Good pay, a house of my own on the property." He took a step closer to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I'm going to accept it, Willa, and I want you to come with me. The room seemed to tilt around her as his words registered. "Go with you to Denver, how, as what? As my wife," he said simply. "If you'll have me." Willa's legs suddenly felt unable to support her weight. She sank down onto the edge of the bed, staring up at him in disbelief. "Your wife? But we've only known each other a few months. You can't possibly—" "I love you," Deacon interrupted, kneeling before her so they were at eye level. "I think I've loved you since that first night on the porch when you told me you wanted to learn to read despite everything. Your courage, your kindness, your hunger for knowledge and beauty, how could I not love you?" He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "I know it's sudden. I know you might not feel the same way, but I'm offering you a choice, Willa. A chance at a different life. One where you can read any book you want, where no one will ever strike you for wanting to learn, where you'll be respected and cherished as you deserve to be." Tears flowed freely down Willa's cheeks now, tears of joy and fear and overwhelming hope. "My father would never allow it," she whispered. "He'd never let me go." "You're 20 years old, Willa. By law, you don't need his permission to marry." Deacon's expression hardened slightly. "I won't pretend it would be easy. He might disown you, but you'd have me, and I swear to you, I would spend every day trying to make you happy." The enormity of what he was proposing washed over her. To leave everything she'd ever known, this town, this house, her father, to start a new life hundreds of miles away with a man she'd known only a few months. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was everything she'd secretly dreamed of but never dared hope for. "I don't want you to answer now," Deacon continued, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. "Take some time to think about it. The position doesn't start until spring, so we have a few months to decide." Willa shook her head, a sense of clarity cutting through her tumultuous emotions. "I don't need time," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I love you too, Deacon. I think I have almost from the beginning, and yes, I'll marry you. I'll go to Denver with you." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with reverence. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory," he murmured against her skin. Caught up in the moment, Willa leaned forward and, with a boldness she didn't know she possessed, pressed her lips to his. It was her first kiss, awkward and unpracticed, but Deacon responded with a gentleness that made her heart soar. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch feather-light as though she were made of the finest porcelain. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Deacon rested his forehead against hers. "We'll need to be careful," he said softly. "Plan everything so your father doesn't suspect until we're ready to leave." Reality intruded on their perfect moment, bringing with it practical concerns. "When should we marry? Where would we live until spring?" "I have some savings," Deacon replied. "Enough to rent a small place in town until we leave for Denver. As for when," he smiled, a touch of mischief in his eyes. "How does Christmas Day sound, a new beginning on a day of hope?" Willa's heart swelled at the thought. "Yes," she agreed, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. Christmas Day would be perfect. As they began to plan the details of their elopement in quiet, excited whispers, neither noticed the shadow that passed briefly across the gap. Beneath the door, the shadow of a man listening intently to every word they said. The next few days passed in a blur of secret planning and barely contained excitement for Willa. On the surface, nothing changed. She cooked and cleaned and served the boarders as always, keeping her eyes downcast when her father was present. But inwardly, she was transformed, her heart light with the promise of escape and happiness just days away. Deacon had secured a small cabin on the outskirts of town for them to occupy until their departure for Denver in the spring. He'd spoken with the minister of the small Presbyterian church, arranging for a private ceremony on Christmas morning. They had agreed that Willa would slip away during the Christmas Eve celebrations, taking only what she could carry in a single bag, and meet Deacon at the church. By the time her father realized she was gone, they would be legally married and beyond his control. It was a good plan, sensible and straightforward. But as Christmas Eve approached, Willa couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Her father had been watching her more closely than usual, his eyes narrowed with suspicion whenever she and Deacon were in the same room. He'd taken to following her around the house, appearing unexpectedly in doorways, his questions about her activities more pointed than before. On the morning of Christmas Eve, As she prepared breakfast for the handful of boarders who remained, her father entered the kitchen and closed the door behind him with deliberate slowness. "Expecting a special day tomorrow, are you?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual. Willa's hand stilled on the biscuit dough she was kneading. "Just Christmas, Pa, same as always." Silas moved closer, the smell of whiskey already on his breath despite the early hour. "Funny thing about Christmas," he mused. "Day of surprises, presents, new beginnings." He emphasized the last two words in a way that made Willa's blood run cold. "Some folks might even think it's a good day for a wedding." Her heart pounding, Willa kept her eyes on the dough, fighting to keep her expression neutral. "I suppose some might," she agreed noncommittally. With a speed that belied his bulky frame, Silas grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully as he yanked her around to face him. "Don't you play dumb with me, girl," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You think I don't know what you and that fancy cowboy have been planning? You think I'm blind to the way you look at each other, the way you sneak around behind my back?" Terror gripped Willa as she realized the extent of his knowledge. "Pa, please shut your mouth," he snapped, twisting her wrist harder until she gasped with pain. "You listen to me now. There will be no wedding tomorrow or any day. You belong here with me, doing what you were raised to do. That man is leaving on today's afternoon stage to Salt Lake City, and if he knows what's good for him, he won't ever show his face in Park City again." Despair washed over Willa in a sickening wave. "You can't make him leave," she protested weakly. "He's paid through the month." Silas's laugh was ugly, devoid of humor. "Oh, but I can. See, I had a little chat with our friend Quinn yesterday while you were at the mercantile. Explained to him what would happen if he didn't get out of town immediately." He released her wrist, shoving her roughly away. "He seemed real understanding once I showed him my shotgun." Willa staggered back against the table, cradling her throbbing wrist. "I don't believe you," she whispered. "Deacon wouldn't just leave without telling me." "Believe what you want," her father replied with cruel indifference. "But that stage leaves at noon and he'll be on it. And you," he jabbed a thick finger at her chest, "you'll be in your room until he's gone. Can't trust you not to do something stupid." With that, he grabbed her roughly by the arm and dragged her toward her small bedroom off the kitchen. Shoving her inside, he slammed the door, and to her horror, she heard the scrape of a chair being wedged under the doorknob. "Pa." She cried, pounding on the door. "You can't do this. Let me out." "Sit tight, girl," came his muffled reply. "I'll let you out once that stage is well on its way. And if you make a fuss, I'll make sure everyone in town knows what kind of woman you really are, sneaking into a man's room for reading lessons." His voice dripped with sarcasm on the last words. "See how quick your precious cowboy wants to marry you when your reputation's in tatters." Willa sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face as the full impact of her father's threats registered. If word got out about her private lessons with Deacon, her reputation would indeed be ruined. In a small town like Park City, such a scandal would follow her forever. And if her father had truly threatened Deacon at gunpoint, a fresh wave of despair crashed over her. Even if Deacon loved her enough to brave her father's wrath, could she ask him to risk his life? To potentially face murder charges if things went wrong? The answer was clear. No matter how much it broke her heart, for hours, Willa alternated between weeping and frantically searching her small room for any means of escape. The single window was too small for her to squeeze through, and the walls were solid. The door, sturdy oak built to withstand the harsh mountain winters, wouldn't budge despite her repeated attempts to force it. As noon approached, she pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear any sound of Deacon, any indication that her father's claims had been a bluff. But the house was quiet, most of the remaining boarders having gone to town for last-minute Christmas shopping or holiday celebrations. Then, faintly, she heard the rumble of the stagecoach arriving at the depot 2 streets over. Panic seized her. If Deacon truly was leaving, if her father had succeeded in driving him away, this was her last chance to see him, to explain, to perhaps salvage something of their plans. In desperation, she grabbed the small wooden chair in her room and with all her strength smashed it against the door. The chair splintered, one leg breaking off in her hand. It wasn't much of a tool, but it was all she had. Using the broken chair leg as a lever, Willa worked at the door frame, trying to force the door open. Her hands soon blistered and bled, but she persisted. driven by the thought of Deacon boarding that stage, believing she had abandoned their plans, perhaps even thinking she had changed her mind about marrying him. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she heard a crack as the door frame splintered slightly. Encouraged, she redoubled her efforts, and finally, with a loud snap, the frame gave way enough for her to force the door open despite the chair wedged against it from the outside. Not stopping to grab a coat despite the bitter cold, Willa raced through the empty kitchen and out the back door. She ran through the snow-covered streets, her thin shoes soaking through almost immediately, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The stagecoach depot was only a few blocks away, but it felt like miles as she pushed her body to move faster, ignoring the stares of townsfolk surprised to see the reserved boarding house girl running as though demons pursued her. She rounded the final corner just in time to see the stagecoach pulling away, its 4 horses straining against their harnesses as they began to pick up speed. "Deacon," she screamed, her voice breaking with desperation. "Deacon." But the stage continued to roll away, the sound of its wheels on the packed snow drowning out her cries. Willa stumbled to a halt in the middle of the street, watching helplessly as her future, her hopes, her love disappeared around the bend. A hand clasped her shoulder and she whirled around, ready to fight off her father if he had followed her. But it wasn't Willa Blackburn who stood there, it was Deacon. "You didn't leave," she breathed, scarcely believing her eyes. "Of course not," he replied, pulling her gently out of the street and into the shelter of the depot's overhang. "Did you really think I would go without you?" Without even saying goodbye, relief made her knees weak. She clutched at his coat, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. "My father said. He told me he threatened you, that you were leaving on today's stage." Deacon's expression darkened. "He did threaten me, yes. Came to my room yesterday with his shotgun, said if I didn't leave town, he'd see me hanging from the nearest tree for corrupting his daughter." His arms tightened around her, "But I'm not so easily frightened off, especially not when it comes to you. But the stage." She gestured weakly toward where the coach had disappeared. "Is carrying my letter to my friend in Denver, confirming that we'll be taking the positions he offered," Deacon explained. "I also sent a wire to the sheriff in Salt Lake City, an old acquaintance, explaining the situation. If your father tries anything, he'll find himself facing serious charges." Hope rekindled in Willa's chest. "Then we can still go through with our plan. The wedding tomorrow," Deacon's face grew serious. "I'm afraid we need to change our plans slightly. Your father knows too much and he's desperate enough to do real harm. I've booked us passage on tonight's late stage to Salt Lake City. We can be married there, away from your father's influence." Willa hesitated, the enormity of leaving immediately hitting her with full force. "Tonight, but I'm not prepared, I haven't packed anything." "We can buy what you need in Salt Lake City," Deacon assured her. "What's important is getting you safely away from here from him." As if summoned by their discussion, a shout rang out from down the street. Willa turned to see her father striding toward them, his face contorted with rage, one hand reaching ominously inside his coat. "Get inside," Deacon ordered, pushing her toward the depot door. "Now, Willa," she stumbled inside the small building where the ticket agent looked up in surprise. Deacon followed, quickly closing and bolting the door behind them. "Sir," he addressed the startled agent, "I need to ask for your help. That man approaching is Willa Blackburn. He's threatened my life and is holding his daughter against her will. Is there a back exit we can use?" The agent, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked from Deacon to Willa's tear-stained face and bruised wrist, visible where her sleeve had pulled back. His expression hardened with understanding. "Through the sorting room," he said, pointing to a door behind the counter. "It leads to an alley. Take a right, then another right, and you'll come to the livery stable. Sam there is my brother-in-law. Tell him Jeb sent you and explain the situation. He'll help you." "Thank you," Deacon said fervently, guiding Willa toward the indicated door just as a pounding began on the front entrance. "Open up, damn you," came Silas's muffled shout. "I know they're in there." The ticket agent Jeb waved them on. "Go, I'll delay him as long as I can." They hurried through the sorting room and out the back door into a narrow, snow-filled alley. Following Jeb's directions, they made their way to the livery stable, where Sam, a burly man with a thick beard, listened to their hurried explanation with growing concern. Blackburn's always been a mean drunk, he commented, leading them to a small tack room at the back of the stable. You two wait here. I'll hitch up my fastest team and get you out of town before he knows what's happened. True to his word, within 15 minutes Sam had a light sleigh ready, drawn by two spirited bay horses. This'll get you to the junction faster than the stage, he explained as he helped Willa into the sleigh and tucked thick fur robes around her. The evening eastbound train stops there at 8. It'll take you straight to Salt Lake City. Deacon pressed some money into the man's hand. I can't thank you enough. Sam waved away his thanks. Just take care of her, he said, nodding toward Willa. And maybe name your first son after me, eh? He added with a wink. As they sped out of town, the sleigh's runners hissing over the snow, Willa finally allowed herself to believe they might actually escape. She looked back once at the receding buildings of Park City, the only home she'd ever known, and felt no regret, only a soaring sense of freedom and possibility. Beside her, Deacon guided the horses with confident hands, his profile strong against the darkening sky. Are you all right? He asked, glancing at her with concern. I am now, she replied, moving closer to him under the fur robes. I was so afraid when I thought you'd left. Never, he said firmly. I meant what I said, Willa. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, a life where you can read any book you want, learn anything that interests you, be whoever you want to be. Tears pricked at her eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy. I love you too, she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder as the sleigh carried them swiftly toward their future. They reached the junction with time to spare, returning the sleigh and team to a prearranged stable hand who would take them back to Sam in Park City. The train arrived precisely at 8, its powerful engine a testament to the modern world that existed beyond the confines of the mining town where Willa had spent her entire life. As they settled into their seats in the passenger car, the warmth of the coal stove a welcome relief after the freezing sleigh ride. Willa gazed out the window at the vast, starlit landscape slipping past. Snow-covered mountains gave way to valleys, then to the darker shapes of smaller settlements, each pinpoint of light representing a life, a story she would never know. What are you thinking? Deacon asked softly, his hand covering hers on the armrest between them. About stories, she replied honestly. About all the books I'll read, all the words I'll learn, about our story and how it's just beginning. His smile in the dim lamplight of the car made her heart skip. It's a good beginning, he said. And I promise you, Willa Blackburn, the middle and end will be even better. Willa Quinn, she corrected gently. Soon, anyway. His eyes darkened with emotion as he raised her hand to his lips. Willa Quinn, he repeated. The sound of it makes me the happiest man alive. As the train carried them through the night toward Salt Lake City and the promise of a new life together, Willa felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and she had no illusions that their path would always be easy, they would face them together, with courage and love and the power of words to guide them. The next morning, Christmas Day, dawned clear and cold in Salt Lake City. Willa stood before a small mirror in a hotel room Deacon had procured for her, attempting to make herself presentable for her wedding with the few items she had been able to purchase from the hotel's small gift shop, a tortoiseshell comb, a ribbon for her hair, a pot of rose-scented cream. Her reflection showed a young woman transformed not by these small luxuries, but by the light of hope and love that shone in her eyes. For the first time in her memory, there was no fear in her expression, no tension in the set of her shoulders. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of Mrs. Holbrook, the hotel owner's wife, who had kindly agreed to help Willa prepare and serve as a witness at the ceremony. "Oh, my dear, you look lovely," the older woman exclaimed as she entered, carrying a large box. "But I think we can make you look even more like a bride with this." She opened the box to reveal a dress of deep blue silk, simple in design but beautifully made, with lace at the collar and cuffs. "I can't accept this," Willa protested, even as her fingers reached out to touch the luxurious fabric. "It's too much." "Nonsense," Mrs. Holbrook replied firmly. "It was my daughter's, but she's moved to San Francisco with her husband and left it behind. It's been sitting in my wardrobe gathering dust, and she'd be pleased to know it was worn for such a happy occasion." She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Besides, every bride deserves something special on her wedding day, with Mrs. Hallbrook's help, Willa changed into the blue dress, which fit as though it had been made for her. The older woman arranged Willa's dark hair in a simple but elegant style, threading the ribbon through it and securing it with the tortoiseshell comb. "There," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "You're a vision. That young man of yours won't know what hit him." Willa blushed at the praise, hardly recognizing the woman in the mirror. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for everything." "It's my pleasure, my dear. Now shall we go?" "I believe they're waiting for us in the hotel parlor." The hotel's small private parlor had been transformed for the occasion. Fresh evergreen boughs decorated the mantelpiece, their piney scent filling the air with the essence of Christmas. A small table held a simple wedding cake that Mrs. Hallbrook had somehow procured on Christmas morning, and beside it stood a bottle of champagne chilling in a silver bucket. But it was Deacon who drew Willa's gaze as she entered the room. He wore a new suit, black and well-fitted, with a crisp white shirt and a dark tie. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked, she thought, like a man from another world, entirely a gentleman from one of the novels they had read together. As she approached, the love and admiration in his eyes made her feel like the heroine of such a novel, beautiful, cherished, worthy. The minister, a kindly older man whom Deacon had located through the hotel's connections, smiled benevolently as they took their places before him. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the traditional vows taking on new meaning as Willa and Deacon spoke them to each other with clear, unwavering voices. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Deacon's kiss was gentle but full of promise, his hands cradling her face as though she were the most precious thing he had ever held. When they turned to face the small gathering, just Mrs. Hallbrook, her husband, and the hotel's young desk clerk who had agreed to serve as the second witness, Willa felt a surge of joy so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Mrs. Quinn," Deacon murmured, his arm secure around her waist. "My wife." The words sent a thrill through her. She was no longer Willa Blackburn, the boarding house cook from Park City, defined by her father's expectations and limitations. She was Willa Quinn, a woman with a husband who cherished her mind as much as her heart, a future bright with possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. The small celebration that followed was filled with warmth and laughter. Mr. Hallbrook proved to be a jovial host, regaling them with stories of the early days of Salt Lake City while they enjoyed slices of the wedding cake and sipped champagne. By the time they retired to the suite Deacon had reserved for their wedding night, an extravagance he insisted upon despite Willa's protests about the cost, it was late afternoon, the winter sun already beginning to set. Alone together at last, with the door locked securely behind them, a momentary shyness fell between them. For all their planning and declarations of love, they had never been truly alone together, never had the privacy to express their feelings without fear of discovery. Deacon, sensing her nervousness, moved to the window rather than toward her. "Come look," he said softly. "The view is spectacular." Grateful for his understanding, Willa joined him at the window. The suite overlooked Temple Square, where the massive granite temple was still under construction, its unfinished walls rising against the backdrop of mountains beyond the city. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed by the vista of the growing city spread before them. "Not as beautiful as my wife," Deacon replied, his arm slipping around her waist. Willa leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I still can't quite believe it," she admitted. "That we're here, that we're married, that we escaped." "Believe it," he said, turning her gently to face him. "This is real, Willa. This is our life now together." He kissed her then, more deeply than before, and Willa responded with all the love and longing she had kept contained for so many weeks. As the kiss ended, Deacon rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly uneven. "I have something for you," he said after a moment. "A wedding gift." He moved to his suitcase and withdrew a package wrapped in plain brown paper. "I had planned to give this to you in Park City, but given the circumstances." He shrugged, a rueful smile playing at his lips as he handed her the package. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Quinn." Willa unwrapped the paper carefully to reveal a book bound in rich brown leather, its cover embossed with gold lettering. "Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen." "Open it," Deacon urged softly. She did, and gasped at what she found written on the flyleaf in Deacon's neat, precise handwriting. To my beloved Willa, whose courage and thirst for knowledge captured my heart. May this be the first volume in the library of our life together. With all my love, Deacon. Tears blurred her vision as she traced her fingers over the words. It's perfect, she whispered, the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. There will be more, he promised. Many more. I meant what I said about filling shelves with books for you. Setting the precious volume carefully on a nearby table, Willa returned to her husband's arms. I love you, Deacon Quinn, she said with all the sincerity in her heart. And I'm not afraid anymore, not of tonight, not of tomorrow, not of anything, as long as we're together. His kiss was her answer, and as he led her toward the bedroom of their suite, Willa left behind the last vestiges of the frightened girl she had been. In her place stood a woman ready to embrace the future, whatever it might hold, with the man who had given her not just books and knowledge, but the courage to reach for a life she had never dared to imagine. The early months of 1874 passed in a whirlwind for the newlyweds. They remained in Salt Lake City through January, Deacon finding temporary work with a freight company while Willa devoured book after book from the city's modest library. By February, they were on their way to Denver, traveling by train through snow-covered mountains and vast, windswept plains. Denver proved to be everything Deacon had promised, and more. The cattle operation he was to manage lay 10 miles outside the growing city, close enough for regular visits to town, but far enough to afford them privacy and the peaceful beauty of the Colorado landscape. The house that came with the position was a revelation to Willa, a sturdy 2-story structure with real glass windows, a proper kitchen with an iron stove, and most miraculous of all, 3 bedrooms. What will we do with so much space? She asked in wonder as Deacon showed her through the rooms on their first day. Fill it, he replied with a smile, pulling her into his arms. With books, with furniture, with children someday if you want that, with life, Willa, and fill it they did. True to his promise, Deacon's first major purchase was wood and tools to build bookshelves, not just one, but many, lining the walls of what became their library. The shelves he had crafted in Park City had been left behind in their hasty flight, but he recreated them with even greater care, sanding and staining the wood until it gleamed in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. Week by week, the shelves began to fill. Some books were purchased new from Denver's growing number of bookshops. Others were found used at estate sales or ordered by mail from catalogs. Deacon seemed to take particular delight in surprising Willa with volumes he thought would interest her: novels by Dickens and the Bronte sisters, poetry collections, histories of the West and other lands, even scientific treatises that stretched her growing reading skills. For her part, Willa threw herself into learning with the same determination that had sustained her through years of secret study. She read voraciously, sometimes staying up late into the night, unable to tear herself away from a particularly engrossing story. She practiced her writing daily, filling notebook after notebook with her increasingly confident hand. By summer, she had progressed enough that Deacon suggested she might consider taking on students of her own, perhaps the children of the ranch hands who lived in smaller cabins on the property. Me, a teacher? The idea both thrilled and terrified her. Why not? Deacon countered, his faith in her abilities unwavering. You know firsthand the hunger to learn that others might feel. Your empathy would make you an excellent teacher. So it was that by autumn, Willa found herself instructing half a dozen children of various ages in the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic. They gathered 3 afternoons a week in the spacious kitchen of the main house, their eager faces reminding her of her own desperate desire to learn. Among her students was Maria, the 10-year-old daughter of the ranch's cook, a Mexican woman named Carmen who had initially been hesitant to allow her child to attend the impromptu school. The girl needs to learn women's work, not books, she had argued when Willa first approached her. What good will reading do her in this life? It will open doors, Willa had replied simply. It will give her choices I never had until I met my husband. Something in Willa's expression must have reached the older woman, for after a moment's consideration, Carmen had nodded. 3 days only, she conceded. The rest of the time she still helps me in the kitchen. Maria proved to be Willa's brightest pupil, soaking up knowledge with an eagerness that reminded Willa painfully of herself. By Christmas, the girl was reading simple stories aloud to her younger siblings, her pride in her accomplishment evident in the way she carefully turned the pages of the books Willa lent her. "She is changed," Carmen remarked to Willa one day as they worked together preserving the last of the autumn apples. "My Maria, she walks taller now, her eyes see farther." The woman's work-worn hands paused in their task. "I was wrong to doubt you, Senora Quinn." Willa smiled, touched by the admission. "We all want what's best for our children," she said. "You've given her a gift by allowing her to learn," Carmen nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps when she is a little older, she could go to the proper school in Denver." "If she is still so hungry for books then?" "I think that would be wonderful," Willa agreed, her heart swelling with quiet satisfaction at this small victory for another girl's future. As 1874 drew to a close and their first wedding anniversary approached, Deacon and Willa's life together had settled into a rhythm of work and learning, companionship and love. The ranch prospered under Deacon's management, his fair treatment of the workers and innovative approaches to cattle breeding earning him the respect of the owner and the loyalty of the hands. Willa, too, had found her place in this new world. Beyond her informal teaching, she had begun to write first simple observations about life on the ranch, then more ambitious attempts at stories drawn from the books she loved. Deacon encouraged her efforts, reading her work with genuine interest and constructive suggestions. On Christmas Eve, with a light snow falling outside and a fire crackling in the hearth of their comfortable sitting room, Deacon presented Willa with a special gift, a journal bound in soft leather, with her initials embossed in gold on the cover. "For your writing," he explained as she ran her fingers over the beautiful object. "I thought perhaps you might want to try your hand at a novel of your own someday." Willa laughed, though the idea sent a secret thrill through her. "A novel, me? What would I write about?" "About a brave young woman who defied convention to follow her heart and her mind," Deacon suggested, his eyes warm with love and pride. "About the power of books to change lives. About anything you want, Willa. That's the beauty of it." Later that night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Willa nestled against Deacon's side, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't come to Park City?" she asked softly. "If you hadn't stayed at the boarding house?" "If we had never met," Deacon's arm tightened around her. "I try not to," he admitted. "The thought of you still there, still under your father's thumb." He sighed. "I believe some things are meant to be, Willa. I believe we were meant to find each other, even across all those miles. Even with all the chances that could have sent you anywhere else. Especially then," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Call it fate or providence or just extraordinary luck, but I'm grateful for it every day." Willa smiled in the darkness, her hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach, where just that morning she had felt the first fluttering movements of the child they had created together. "I have another Christmas gift for you," she whispered, guiding his hand to the spot. "But you'll have to wait until summer to hold it properly." Deacon went very still for a moment, then raised himself on one elbow to look down at her, his expression a mixture of wonder and joy in the dim light. "Willa, are you saying?" "We're going to have a baby," she confirmed, her own happiness bubbling up in a soft laugh. "In June, the doctor thinks." With a sound that was half laugh, half sob, Deacon gathered her into his arms, his kisses falling on her lips, her cheeks, her forehead. "A baby," he repeated in awe. "Our child. Another reader for our library," Willa added, sharing the vision that had been forming in her mind since she'd first suspected her condition. "Another mind to nurture, another heart to love. You are extraordinary, Willa Quinn," Deacon said fervently, his hand gentle on her abdomen. "And I fall more in love with you every day." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, Willa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a girl punished for daring to learn, to a woman creating a legacy of knowledge and love for the next generation. The road had not been easy, but each step had led her here, to this house filled with books and warmth, to this man who had seen her true worth, to this future bright with promise. In the years that followed, the Quinn family grew along with their library. Their son, Samuel, born in the summer of 1875, was joined 2 years later by a daughter, Eleanor. Both children were raised in a house where books were treasured, where questions were encouraged, where the pursuit of knowledge was celebrated rather than punished. Willa's informal school expanded into a proper classroom built on the ranch property, where she taught not only the children of the workers, but also those from neighboring ranches who had no access to the schools in Denver. Her reputation as an excellent teacher spread, and eventually, she was invited to give occasional lectures at the Denver Ladies Literary Society, an honor that both terrified and delighted her. In 1880, Willa completed her first novel, a thinly veiled account of her own journey from ignorance to education, from oppression to freedom. When it was accepted by a publisher in New York, Deacon's pride in her accomplishment was boundless. He insisted on hosting a celebration to which they invited everyone from the ranch workers to the mayor of Denver. "To my wife," he toasted that night, raising his glass as he stood beside her, "who has proven that with courage, determination, and love, any obstacle can be overcome." "The world is richer for your words, Willa." As she looked around at the gathering, her children healthy and happy, her friends and neighbors genuinely pleased for her success, her husband still gazing at her with the same love and admiration, after 7 years of marriage, Willa felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. From the punished girl forbidden to read, she had become a teacher, a mother, and author. From the lonely cook in a dreary boarding house, she had become the heart of a home filled with laughter and learning, and it had all begun with a cowboy who filled a shelf with books just for her. That night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Willa and Deacon stood together in their library, now expanded to fill an entire room of the house. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, laden with books of every description, some well-worn from frequent reading, others newer additions to their growing collection. "Do you remember that first little shelf you built in Park City?" Willa asked, her arm around his waist as they surveyed their literary kingdom. "I do," Deacon replied, pulling her closer. "I remember thinking it wasn't nearly enough for all the books I wanted to give you." "It would have been enough," she said softly. "Just that one shelf, if it had to be." "Just knowing someone believed I deserved to read, to learn." Deacon turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with the same tenderness he had always shown her. "You deserved the world, Willa. All I did was help you claim it." As his lips met hers in a kiss as sweet and promising as their first, Willa knew with absolute certainty that in this library, in this home, in this life they had built together, she had found something far more precious than any story written in the books that surrounded them. She had found her own happy ending, written in the language of love and learning that Deacon had taught her to read.